Hello, everybody. We're back for the Move Better, Feel Better Feldenkrais Awareness Summit. Really glad to have you here, Cynthia Allen. And it's been exciting so far. We're actually getting pretty far along in the summit in this track we're calling Essential Feldenkrais. And we've already heard from Diana Razumi on awareness through movement, sometimes called ATM. And today we're going to be privileged to hear about functional integration. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to David Zemach Bersin. He first met Dr. Feldenkrais in 1973 and studied with him over the next 10 years in Europe, US, Israel. He's only one of 8 people in the world that completed their entire training with Dr. Feldenkrais. He's maintained a private practice since then, working with adults and children. He's a graduate of UC Berkeley, and he directs professional training programs around, well, mostly around New York these days, I think, but he's been all over the world. I'm not sure if he's still traveling all over the world, but we'll hear from him about that. And he's created many important contributions to the work, including co-authoring a program called Relaxercise, which has been very popular for a very long time. Still, I highly recommend it. And well, we're just really glad to have you here, David. Thanks.
I'm honored to be with you.
Yeah, good. And I know you and are living out in Pennsylvania. And you do your practice primarily, your private practice, primarily out of New York City. Is that correct? Or Boston?
And Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania. Wonderful. Okay. So why don't you give us your version of how you got involved in this work, or what's your connection, how your connection to Moshe Feldenkrais developed?
Sure. As you mentioned, I met Dr. Feldenkrais in 1973. He came to Berkeley, actually, while I was a junior. And I had been told about him a number of years earlier by a psychologist, a friend, and who had seen him give an FI lesson to a friend of hers and had really been impressed. And I purchased the book Awareness Through Movement, and I could not make heads or tails of it, as happens with many people, because the first 100 pages of the book is theory and him ruminating on different things having to do with the brain and how the nervous system works. And but there was one sentence on the book jacket that really got me. I'm sure a sentence that you're familiar with, where it says, Dr. Feldenkrais demonstrates that nothing is permanent about our behavior patterns except our belief that they are so.
Isn't that huge?
That's right. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, that sentence kept reverberating in me for about 1.5 years, and then lo and behold, I'm in Berkeley, he's in Berkeley. And so he taught an evening class for the public. He taught a daytime, 5-day-a-week class for a group of about 30 people. And I kept visiting that daytime class as often as I could, and no one asked me to leave, even though they had probably paid in today's dollars, $2,000 or $3,000 for the privilege of spending a month with Moshe. And it had been organized by Esalen Institute that still exists today. And during that month, there was a middle-aged fellow, a very sweet, intelligent man. He was actually a US Senate page, who had very, very involved cerebral palsy. And he would get a lesson every single day from either Dr. Feldenkrais or one of Dr. Feldenkrais' assistant, somebody named Yochanan Ryerwant, more often than not. And the changes in this fellow were just amazing. The reduction in spasticity, the improvement in his diction, because his tongue was no longer so spastic. His throat was no longer so, his breathing was no longer so spastic. It was like a stunning transformation. So in a funny way, it was functional integration that captivated me. Of course, I was enjoying awareness through movement. I was benefiting from awareness through movement in a profound and personal, transformative way. But somehow intellectually, it was functional integration that captivated me. I felt that this person understands something about the very basis on which life itself is organized. And I still believe that. Um, I believe that that is the fundamental basis of the effectiveness of functional integration, is that we really are speaking to the brain, we're speaking to the nervous system in you could say in the language that it understands, which is movement and sensory experience. So that was it. That really stimulated. I felt like I've never seen anything like this before. And
And David, you have a family background that's quite medical. Is that correct?
that's correct.
So
That's correct.
you're used to treatment related modalities.
And I'm accustomed to the only worthwhile conversation being diagnostic and centered on pathologies.
Right, right. So it must have been really a truly extraordinary thing. And when I think, for people who are tuning in and are going, I don't even know what functional integration is, we're about to show you an actual functional integration lesson that David is giving, and we're going to give you some additional commentary to go with it, because I think it, I remember my first one watching it. I actually signed up for the training program and didn't even know there was such a thing as functional integration. And was shocked when someone said, someone's going to be doing work with you today and everybody else is going to be watching. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
That's right.
And really it is both incredibly boring and incredibly wonderful and mysterious and totally surprising in a delightful way. Until you know what it is, and then it's not so boring, right? But in the beginning, for a newbie, it's a little like, oh, okay, what are they expecting of me here?
That's right. It can be very disorienting for a newbie. How do I sort this experience?
Mm-hmm.
But if I can, that was an interesting point you raised about the background, the occupation of many of the people in my family being medical. It's so diametrically the opposite of Moshe's thinking. And it's an extraordinary thing. I spent over 10 years studying with him, and 5 times, I guess it was, I went to Tel Aviv and would just sit, even long before I was a practitioner. But after that meeting in Berkeley, I got myself to Israel as soon as I graduated from university, and I would sit he allowed me, this extraordinary, he allowed me to sit in his office and watch him work all day, 5.5 days a week. And it was so moving and so touching to see how he never pathologized anybody. He never contradicted them. It was just he only, I think truly, he only saw the potential, the best of each person.
Mm. That reminds me of the interview that's coming up with Linda Tellington-Jones.
Mm.
For her, very similar experience with Moshe, and actually that never contradicting, even though her work went in a really different direction, that underlying wisdom of the individual is what really stuck with her. So it's lovely to hear again from another point of view. Well, just give us like a one truly a one-sentence description of functional integration, because and then I'm gonna ask you to break apart a little bit how Moshe developed this concept, and then we're gonna look at the actual session.
Sure. I think the one sentence definition is that functional integration is the hands-on, one-on-one aspect of the Feldenkrais method, in which the understanding and knowledge of the practitioner is used to benefit the student, the client. From Moshe's point of view, and I'm sure you will hear this from other people, there isn't really a big distinction between awareness through movement and functional integration. He really considered them two sides of the same coin. Of course, awareness through movement has the potential to be disseminated on a much wider basis to be used by everyone. But some people who have difficulties, injuries, pain, really functional integration is what is needed. What was I going to tell you? Yes. Oh, so there's always this discussion within the Feldenkrais community. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Oh, I mean functional integration or awareness through movement. And I think in some ways we have to say awareness through movement came first. But it's first by a matter of probably months or maybe a year, because of his long background in judo. I know you had last year Elizabeth Behringer talking about the relationship between Moshe's martial arts experience and the Feldenkrais method. And I was thinking the other day how during the war, when Moshe was sequestered in Farley, Scotland, at a submarine research encampment, really, and he wasn't allowed to leave until he'd been there for quite a long time. But he began by figuring out a way to teach rolling and falling to these scientists, fellow scientists, none of whom who had any experience with martial arts or even probably physical activity. And so that began this idea of how to use successive approximations to optimize learning. So that's where he got that idea. And but around about the same time, as he recounts in his book, The Potent Self, he began to see if he could apply these ideas about learning to working with, again, the scientists that he was meeting. And he had one chap in particular that he worked with already in 1948. So I don't think it was really one before the other. I think that his immense empathy for people, his immense desire to help people to improve their lot in life, motivated him in terms of the development of both aspects of his work.
Thank you. Thank you. It was pretty remarkable to listen. Gosh, was that about maybe 6 or 7 years ago at the conference, some of his Moshe's early journals. I think it was David Katz maybe that brought them forward for us.
Cates.
Thank you, David Cates, that brought them forward for us. And already as a young child, it's not a mystery that young children are very empathetic, but we saw already in Moshe at the ages of 12, 13, a desire to relieve suffering.
That was actually Mark Rees, and I think the conference in Los Angeles, and he introduced the things that he was discovering as he began to write his biography of Moshe.
Mhm.
And that's right. That's right. You see these journals from when he's 12, 13, and already um, he's thinking outside the box. He's thinking about how cultural constraints oftentimes are having a profound effect on somebody's self-image, on their psychological, sexual development already as a teenager.
Mhm. Yeah, I thought it was interesting, and I don't want to make him sound like he's, somebody that's above being human, because he certainly was extraordinarily human. But he did somehow another end up with a very interesting mind quite early in life that we were benefiting from now. Can we take a look at an example of a functional integration session, and then uh, maybe you give us a little setup here before we start it. Then we'll stop it for people every few minutes and talk a little bit about it, break it open a little bit, and then continue on.
Sounds like a brilliant idea. This is a lesson during a public workshop, an introductory workshop about the Feldenkrais method. And after, I think it was the first or the second awareness through movement lesson, there's a particular woman who's having difficulty with the lesson because of pain in her right arm and her right shoulder. During the break after the lesson, I learned that she's actually had many lessons before. She's had a couple of years of physical therapy and still has difficulty raising her right arm. In common parlance, you'd say she probably had frozen shoulder. And of course, it was improved, but you'll be able to see that there's still a significant difference in her ability to raise her right arm compared to her left. I think we'll let the lesson unfold. I think a lot of the interesting things will be clear, but I look forward to you interjecting your questions.
Great, let's do that.
You can see the difference, that she raises this arm easily, and if you look at the distance from here to here, okay? Just doing what's easy. Yeah, about there. That's right. And look at, can you see that this distance is different? All right. So it's her right arm. I just want to see here. You think of this as she and I are going to have a conversation. And I want her to feel that distance here. And there's, again, a very simple idea that she has an intelligent brain. And feel that distance. And this distance from here to here, and how this was so short, that her feeling that difference already has perturbed her brain. In other words, the fact that I've made these things evident, I've made them obvious to her, that her brain is kind of thinking about it. Not consciously, not where she's aware of it, but as I said earlier when we started, so much of what goes on in our brain we're not aware of. Most people would say at least 90% of what's going on we're not aware of. And so we're wanting to access that 90%. Now, the other thing to notice, or that I would bring to your attention, is that I'm only going to do things right now that she's already doing. That sounds funny. She's presented me with, I can't raise my right arm easily, right? That's, you could say that, in simple English, that's what she's presented. I have some discomfort when I lift my right arm. So for most people would say, oh, now let's correct that, right? Let's fix that. Now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm not going to try to fix it. I'm going to support her in what she's already doing. And I'll explain. Now, you feel that movement of your head to the right compared to that. You feel how your head goes easily here, light, simple, and to the left, oh, we stop. You feel that? Okay. In other words, contrary to what we just saw, you'd say, well, that's strange, because the left arm came so much closer to the head than the right arm. And I would propose that there's a relationship between what Willa can do easily and what she has trouble doing. You would think that if the right arm has trouble raising the right arm, why would I want to lower it?
That hurts a little bit from the inside of the elbow down towards the thigh.
But that doesn't.
That feels great.
Yeah. So maybe there's a little something other than the shoulder going on here. Because remember I said that she doesn't straighten the right arm also. Remember I showed you she kept it bent a little. So maybe there's something in the elbow. But it's minor. This is what she does. Look, which shoulder is going higher when I do that? Which arm is getting longer upwards when I do that? You see that? Blop, 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 blop. The left shoulder, right? The left shoulder goes up. And look how the pelvis tilts to the left so nicely. Each time I do that, blop, 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 blop. You remember when I took her head down to the right? And then I took it to the left, right? So there was that, actually softer than before. And now feel, you feel? Mm-hmm. Can you see? Can you see that now the head is coming to the left even though I never took it to the left, is coming down to the left more easily.
Okay, David, I'd like to ask you some questions about that first really interesting opening 8 minutes.
Sure.
And the first one I'd like to ask you is, was this just your assessment? I get asked this all the time. Was all that the assessment because you spent a lot of time saying, this is what she does, this is what she does, this is what she does. So were you assessing there?
In functional integration, there really isn't a, what should I say, a strict distinction between what you mean by assessment and what I would mean by the lesson or the treatment. I don't have a problem with the word treatment. I know some people do. But no, we're interacting together. And where I would put the emphasis is that I am finding how to join. Her name is Willa. I'm finding ways to join her. So whether I'm bringing her head to the right or I'm bringing her right arm down, in both cases, I'm not doing that because I have a treatment trick or it's a technique, but it's because I am finding what Willa herself is doing. In other words, Willa herself is leaning to the right. She's leaning to the right, and most likely she's bringing her weight onto the left leg. Remember I said that when we lengthen the left arm, that the weight of her pelvis beautifully moved to the left, means rotated, her pelvis rotated. That indicates to me that there is a 90% possibility, or probability, I should say, that she's got most of her weight on her left leg. Now, she's had pain in her right shoulder, her right arm, for the better part of 2 years, as I recall. Mm-hmm. So that's where I would put the emphasis, that I don't want to do one thing that contradicts what she's doing. In other words, I don't want to alert the subterranean sympathetic system of that brain, meaning the lower centers of the brain that want to, are vigilant at protecting Willa from experiencing the pain, which is what anybody who has chronic pain will tell you, that they organize themselves, their movement, their life around not feeling the pain. So that tells us a very important thing, that every human nervous system, and we could say every living thing on our planet, gravitates or is attracted toward the avoidance of pain and toward what is beneficial or positive for that organism, what enhances that organism's viability. So I want her attention, but I don't want her to feel that I'm doing anything that threatens her, that jeopardizes her in any way.
That's very key. And then I think that also goes to the quality of your touch. So there's something that I think most people can see, even if they're never seen a session before, that there's something about the quality of the touch, like how you hold the arm, and then there's this kind of withdrawal back as if your arm and her arm are the same arm.
That's very observant of you. As a fellow traveler, and I would only pray that it's obvious to other people. But that's right. I want that contact with her, that moving of her head, that pulling of her arm, is experienced by her, dare I say, as pleasurable, where she feels, oh, I'm all right. Oh, and I'm safe here. You see, a nervous system that does not feel safe, as she has not for a couple of years, a nervous system that doesn't feel safe has difficulty learning. We know this from a lot of very elegant research with children, that children who are under stress, children with psychological, emotional, and social difficulties, it affects their learning. Now, of course, here in the Feldenkrais method, we are not talking about objective academic learning. We're talking about accessing the sensory motor learning centers of our brain, the parts of our brain that were so brilliant, we could say, at helping us to figure out how to roll from our back to our sides, figuring out how to get us each to crawling, to standing, to walking. And so we're speaking to the brain in exactly this same language.
Okay, well, let's go back and take a look at the next section. You've already done something I think that's also interesting, which is you went to one of the feet and you started to connect this to the opposite shoulder. I think we're going to see a little bit more about that. I think it's also something that maybe makes us stand out a little bit in the world of, well, when people think of us as maybe being sometimes part of the rehab world, which, you know, I don't think is inappropriate. I think it makes us stand out a little bit too. So let's watch a little bit more about that as well.
And now I'm just going to move the thoracic vertebra a little to the left, a little to the left. I want to make what she's already doing even easier. And I want her to feel how, oh, look how soft that got, right? That's soft, that's easy. That's easy. Yeah. So that's the left shoulder, isn't it? And that's there in the middle of the back. Goes to the left. The middle of the back goes to the left. And the left shoulder gets higher. The left shoulder gets higher. That's right. And the pelvis turns to the left. And the pelvis turns to the left. Good. Let's lie on the left side for a minute. If that left shoulder were free, would it be going up or down when I do this? That's right. If it were free, if there wasn't, obviously it's fixed because of but the ribs on the left side are doing exactly what they were doing before. Can you see that? The ribs on the left side are doing what they were doing before. They're getting longer on the left side. And you still might be wondering why it's the right arm that hurts her. Why is he doing all this stuff with the left?
So David, why are you doing all this stuff on the left? I mean, you've said it. I mean, for goodness sakes, we're like at least 10 minutes into this session, maybe longer if we were seeing the whole.
Much longer, probably 20 minutes.
Yeah, and you are still just doing what she already does.
Yeah, isn't that make it interesting? So you see, it's much easier for Willa to lengthen that right arm. Now here's the key, and here's again, I think Moshe's brilliance.
I mean, it was much easier for her to lengthen her left arm.
Her left arm. So Dr. Feldenkrais understood, or we can understand, being the beneficiaries of his knowledge, that the lengthening of the arm, very little of the reaching with your arm, very little of that has to do with your arm. A minor part of that has to do with lengthening your arm. It has to do with how your chest participates, how you shift your weight, the orientation of your head and eyes. In other words, the engagement of our whole self. The more our whole self is involved in a congruent way, the easier and simpler it is. Now, I think we should mention that there's an assumption here, and I think it's a very good assumption, that our brain is interested to make our life simpler and easier, to make our life more comfortable. Every organism, you could say every nervous system, but it really even unicellular life is interested to optimize its, you could say, its biological life, its viability. And I make a very big assumption that every person I work with, every person that I do awareness through movement or functional integration with, that their brain is actually and decidedly knows how to act on your behalf, on the person's behalf. So, and is looking for ways to make things easier. So the other thing is, I'm doing the work for her. I'm doing the work. I'm lengthening the left arm. I'm pushing through from the right leg. And in doing that, I'm actually taking over the muscular work. And just as we have an intelligent brain, every brain, if you support that body, you support that arm, it will stop the unnecessary work that it's doing. This is fundamental. That brain thinks, I don't need to contract these muscles anymore. That silly guy is doing it for me. I'm giving a little, what do you call it? Anthropomorphizing a little here. So what's happening in exaggerating or joining her in the thing that she can do easily, which is shorten, bend on the right, bend her head to the right, all of which restricts her right arm. If you stand up and you bend your head to the right like Willa and you lift your left arm, no problem. But if I lift my right arm, even I feel the restriction. Of course, if I bend my head to the left and I shorten the left side, then I can lift my right arm easily. It's as simple as that. Now, of course, if I just tell that to Willa or to anybody, they think, well, so what? I say it still hurts. So that's where learning comes in, and that's where assembling the lesson in such a way that the nervous system can learn what might be a better way. So, because that arm is never going to be without pain if she continues to be bent to the right. Simple as that. I mean, it's very complicated, but as long as she's bent over there, the movement in that right arm is going to be restricted.
Right, because the biomechanical way in which the joint and the musculature is meant to work is being limited. And I think this is, of course, all the rehab people watching get that. But I just want to say that for people who maybe don't from that background, that when you don't have this clear weight shift to support a joint, then you are limiting its biomechanical function of in this case, reaching.
That's right, because the muscles that attach to the inferior processes of the shoulder blade, in other words, the lower part of the shoulder blade, they go all the way, they attach at the spine, they go way down the back. Some of them even attach to the pelvis. And as long as those muscles are contracted, I'm going to have difficulty mobilizing my arm in any direction, really. And so we're joining Willa in supporting what is parasitic to her intention. I don't think I can say it more clearly. That effort that she's unconscious of, because you know what? There was a time when that bending to the right was a lifesaver for her. Right? It inhibited the movement of the shoulder. Maybe it allowed even for healing to take place in a way that was positive. But now she's habituated to it. In other words, she's adapted to, in a way, to the injury that makes the injury persist.
Yes. So instead of thinking about stretching or thinking about strengthening, we're first thinking about making the excessive work unnecessary, or maybe not first, but one of the things we're thinking about is making the excessive work unnecessary, so that we're not trying to put strengthening or stretching on top of, we're not in a struggle with what's already there.
I couldn't say it better myself.
And then as she comes out of that struggle, she's actually able to do what she already does even better with more ease. And then we saw, even at a few minutes, that you were already able to take her head a little bit to the left, even though you had been doing nothing, theoretically nothing, to make that possible. But of course you were doing something to make that possible.
Of course, because the muscles on the right side of her neck that pull her head successfully to the right, they're inhibiting her from, if they stay contracted all the time, then my head is inhibited from being able to bend to the left. In other words, I'm over here all the time. It's not as exaggerated as I'm showing you. So in fact, it's very perceptive of you also that was the only move I've done so far that was the non-habitual.
Correct, but you did still stay in what was her current range of ease.
That's right, even when I took the head to the left. But that was the only move so far that was not her habitual. And just to, because I don't think it was very clear for a lot of people, or wouldn't be, I was tilting her pelvis toward her head when she was lying on the side. And that tilting of the pelvis toward her head, of course, shortens. I'm joining her in that general shortening of her right side.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's take a look again.
Don't do anything. Yeah, just remember when Willow was lying on her back, I did that movement with her head, didn't I? I took the right ear towards the right shoulder. Good. Now. Okay. So if the arm can't come towards the head, why can't the head come towards the arm? For the brain and the musculature, it's pretty much the same thing. Pretty much the same thing. Mm-hmm. And just feel the movement of the ribs on the right side when you inhale. That's right. Now, again, just don't do anything, but feel now the movement of the ribs on the right side when you inhale. Good. Now feel here, the ribs on the right side come together. Boop, they come together. They come together. And then when I do that, no, don't do anything. When I do that, no, don't do anything. When I do that, feel that the distance from the pelvis to the ribs on the right side increases, doesn't it? In other words, there's more room there. Remember how when you inhaled and you felt like the left side of the lower abdomen was free? See if you can feel that now the right side is doing something, that there's some space there. Mm-hmm. And now feel that each time I do that, something happens in the right shoulder. Each time I do that, in fact, what happens is that ever so slightly, that as long as this is happening, it's very difficult for the right arm to get long. And that may have been going on before the injury. In other words, the injury may have happened because this was this meant that you had to use more effort to lengthen the right arm, more effort to raise the right arm. But here, if you think of that, and just let me do it, that's what you didn't do. That's what you didn't do. That's what you didn't do.
Okay. So this is an interesting little piece in here in a couple of different ways. You had been going with the pattern. You had been asking nothing of her right shoulder, really. And then you began to attach her hand to her head, and you said, there's no reason why the head can't come to the shoulder or the arm if the arm can't come to the head or the shoulder. That's an interesting statement.
Yeah. So we have to remember that she has had this discomfort for the better part of 2 years. And that means that she has avoided most movements with her right arm, unless they're right in the movements involve being right in front of her. But anything that involves taking the arm backwards, taking the arm up, taking the arm away from herself, except right directly in front of herself, has been a no-no, has been excluded from her repertoire. And so that's my idea. I'm just going to begin very simply. So already I feel, even just bringing the arm up a little bit is already limited or constricted. And so, all right, let's change the relationship and let's bring the head to the arm. Why? Because that arm and that head, that hand and that mouth, that hand and that face have been, you can see she's more than 2 years old, meaning that she had a long life of being able to have a right arm that worked beautifully for her. And so I'm wanting to stimulate those parts of her brain that remember how she used to use her healthy right arm. So this is very primitive, very basic, the relationship of the arm to the head. It's there already in utero. And so I'm attempting to provoke, elicit those neurons, those parts of her brain that remember that right arm being healthy and free of pain. Is that helpful?
That's
There's a couple of things I would like to say is, though now we're really into doing what is less easy, shall we say, for Willa, it's still a non-corrective approach. I remember Moshe once said something to me that I thought was just extraordinary. And I always tell my students, he said, if you improve the person, the problem will improve. Right? So what does that mean? It means you improve the person's organization, their self-image, the way that they use their whole self in the action, the way that they're organized to lift the arm, then the pain will disappear. It's not as, absolute as that, obviously, but it definitely informs my orientation in working with Willa. I'm doing everything to avoid the pain and to have a dialogue, although in this case, I really regret that I'm speaking so much and verbalizing so much. It's because there's an audience and I want to keep them engaged. Ordinarily, if Willa were come to my private practice, I don't think I would have said 98% of what I said.
But there's just one thing you would have said, and this is the thing that you said: feel the movement of the right ribs now as you were moving it. Feel the breath coming into the right ribs. That is something you would have said in your private session. And why is that?
Well, the right side of Willa's chest, the right side of her diaphragm has been constricted for a long time. That means that when she inhales, because of that contraction on the right side, that habitual contraction, the right side of the diaphragm has not been free to descend.
So it seems like you're not taking it for granted that she's going, whoa, I'm feeling that. You're saying, hey, you've had a little amnesia here. I mean, you haven't moved here, so therefore maybe you don't recognize this area. I just want to call it out to you a little bit that you're allowed to inhabit that. You're allowed to bring that into your awareness.
Yes, and with the caveat that I would be doing that 90% less if Willa were to come to my private practice.
Okay.
I think of functional integration as largely nonverbal. But certainly here, it seems to me that a lot of the things that I'm articulating are making the implicit explicit, and that might be useful for her.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, let's continue on.
Okay.
That's good. And just feel the ribs on the right side.
That's something I've never felt.
No, I think it's been a very long time. Ah, good, beautiful. And stand that right foot on the left ankle. Good. And just, you'll see, just move the right knee toward the ceiling a little bit. Ah. Good. And back. And toward the ceiling a little bit. And back. Beautiful. And toward the ceiling a little bit. Good. And stay there for a moment. Oh. Oh. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. And come back and rest. Aha. Now, that's good. That's good. That's right. Now feel that's another way. The right side of the chest is getting long.
Okay, I feel like we just made a big change in the last 5 minutes from not just from the easy side, but you've done now quite a bit of joining on the more difficult side, doing what it already does, which we would, and then you had her stay on this foot and you had her turn her whole body a little bit back, a very undifferentiated movement, still something very accessible to her. And then there was this switch to starting to explore differentiated movement.
Yeah. So let's unpack that a little bit. So the standing of the foot on her leg, the top foot, allows what? Allows for her right leg and the right side of her pelvis to go backwards to the right. This is unfamiliar to her. This is, remember I said earlier how her pelvis so easily went to the left every time that left arm got long. Well, that makes any healthy person lengthening their left arm would probably roll, most likely would roll their pelvis to the left. If you say, please, lengthen the arm more, no, more. Well, here we're moving the arm back. And in fact, if you look closely, you'll see that the right arm is lying on her head. In other words, it's exactly the thing that she couldn't do when we started the lesson. She is lying that right arm on the right side of her face. And so and why is it easy to do that? Because of the foot standing. The foot standing enables her whole self to roll backwards. And that is completely a non-habitual or foreign, or a movement that she has not done for a very long time. In other words, the scapula is going backwards, the arm is going backwards behind her. I promise you, she has not done that with that arm raised since her, whatever the original injury was. So then, so you could call that generalized movement. You're using the word non-differentiated, meaning everything moving together. Then I say, okay, that was easy. That was simple. And she rests the right leg on her left leg. And we begin to say, well, look, if the arm is back here, maybe we can also lengthen the arm. And now what have we done? We've prepared the territory, you could say. We did everything but lengthen the arm, didn't we? So the right side of her chest now can get long because of the work we did earlier. Her right hip can move south, which would what would happen in a healthy or we say well-organized person, if they lengthen their right arm, their pelvis would shift to the right and they would push the right foot against the floor to help themselves to lengthen the right arm. And that's all there available for Willa now.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to also point out, just because I remember Dr. Robert Schleip's research that he presented for us last year, there was a couple uses of your voice in this section in which you basically make like a sort of a low And Robert Schleip talked about how much of the change the research shows much of the change that's happening with people has to do with us using kind of ooey gooey. He called them ooey gooey, as I recall, ooey gooey sounds. And that this connects really deep into the nervous system and gives it permission to change. So there's another little interesting element here that you've done a couple of times that probably everybody listening also felt as a listener, even though you're not on the table.
Yeah, it's a way of affirming the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's continue on.
Okay.
Now you can take this arm to the head and you can, that's right, just rest the arm there and you can go down and you can go back and you can go down and you can go up and down and up and right and left and right and left. And that's it. And just feel where your right arm is.
I'd like to say something. I would just like to point out that I don't want to deny that there are adhesions or were adhesions in Willa's shoulder joint. It wasn't that simply the diminishment of that right arm, right hand, right shoulder in her self-image and in her motor cortex. And I say that because there's beautiful research by Ramachandran that demonstrates that when we have an injured limb, the neurons that are active related to that limb, they become quiescent very, very quickly within a matter of minutes and hours. So I don't want to deny that there was actually a physical difficulty in Willa's shoulder joint. I would only say that that shoulder joint is getting lubricated and those adhesions are being broken up in a way that doesn't stir up the anxiety and the bracing and the kind of sympathetic activation that it has been for the last 2 years. That's all.
Okay, I want to talk about that a little bit then.
Sure.
So that concept then, to me, of adhesions that you're using there means that you're thinking that the adhesions themselves are a bit of a neurological learning. Because I don't believe you're breaking up adhesions there. I mean, people go in and manipulate adhesions and break them up in a very forceful way. There's something else happening.
Well, the only way to increase the movement in that shoulder joint is to break those adhesions to be broken up.
Well, they're releasing. I don't want to. I think it's different.
Okay.
Different than breaking up.
They're connective tissue, so
tissue. Something's releasing, and it's releasing in a very different quality. Because I think this is important for me. It's important. Maybe it's not for anybody else. That it's a very different quality of how they're releasing compared to the normal manipulation, which is an aggressive breaking up of the adhesion.
Of course, I completely agree. All I'm trying to say is for those who would say, hey, wait a minute, he's doing that because there must have not been adhesions, right? Of course there are
There's
adhesions
definitely
in
some,
that joint.
yes,
Hmm?
definitely some people are thinking that.
That's right.
There's no doubt about that. Yes. Okay, thank you. Let's continue on.
That's right. Oh, yes. It's been a while. There. Good. Lie on your back. Okay, so we remember what it was like to take the head down to the right, and you saw some improvement going to the left, but let's do that again just so you can see. And then look. And we remember how easy this was. Yeah. And feel where your right arm is. Remember, this is your right arm. And this is your left arm. And this is your right arm. And what's the problem? What's the problem? Feel your heels. Feel your heels. This arm gets long, the left heel. This arm gets long, the right heel. This arm gets long, the left heel. This arm gets long, the right heel. You feel that? Bump. The left heel gets pulled up. Right heel gets pulled up. And both heels get pulled up. Now, you'll feel something interesting, which is that you can do easily. And here, you feel? Because that's right. That's easy. That's easy. And feel what happens. You can feel the chest moving relative to the table. Good. There you go. That's something. That's something. Good. Oh. Good. That's moving the rib cage on the right. The rib cage on the right that is moving inside the shoulder blade. That's right. Good. Now this will even be easier. Where's your right ear? Where's the right elbow? Oh. Roll to your side. Yeah, and sit up. Raise your left arm towards the ceiling. Just what's easy. And now each time just a few times, each time you lengthen the left arm, lift your right hip off the table. So that's it, exactly. And back, and come back. So you just do that easily. Just nothing to it. You just lengthen the left arm a little bit and roll onto the left hip. Beautiful. And come back. Good. Beautiful. Feel how the chest moves to the left, especially the middle of the chest. Yeah, just from the inside. Good. Okay, put the arm down. Raise your right arm. Just what's easy. And do the same thing now. Excellent. And see if you can think of a line going from the left tush to your right shoulder blade, and that lifting the tush makes the shoulder blade get a little longer. That's enough. Just what's easy. And think of the middle of the right side of the chest moving to the right. That's it. Now do it 4 times quickly. Kind of blip, blip, blip. Faster. Faster. Good. And bring the arm down. And slowly come to standing. And just see how you feel. So this is the easy arm, right? And it's easier than it was, okay? So feel that distance. Good. Now, don't do anything. Just, that's it. Feel how that is, and lean to the, that's right. Just feel how that is compared to when we started.
Okay, so we have this lovely piece here as you wrap up, in which she's in sitting. You're again connecting, maybe not so much the foot, but the pelvis on the opposite side to the reaching of the arm. But actually the language that you use is really interesting. You ask her to draw a line from her tush to her shoulder blade. So her left buttocks or left side of the pelvis to her right shoulder blade. You didn't say to the arm reaching in space, you said to the shoulder blade. So this, I think, is important to point out, that the specificity of your words so much matter.
Sure, but I would find it completely acceptable and reasonable if he, so to speak, had brought her attention to her middle finger of her right hand.
I know, but you're really getting proximal there, because then you go
That's right.
The chest, go onto the chest and say, notice the chest sliding as well. So you've really brought it back into the proximal function of herself.
That's exactly right. I'm sure that in that moment, I was drawn to some way in which I thought her chest needed to soften and move a little more easily.
And it was a lovely improvement.
It was very sweet.
Very sweet. Anything else you want to say about this as we kind of wrap up? I mean, I think one of the issues for us to say is that this was not a 25-minute long lesson.
Yeah, you're gonna have to hold on. My dog seems to have some commentary about it. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Cynthia.
So is there anything you'd like to say as we wrap up, David? I know that this was not, for example, a 25-minute long lesson. We've edited it way down here for the purposes of today. Yeah,
it was originally more like 45 minutes. And I would say that's more of a typical time for functional integration. I think if I was to put a bow around it, the thing that stands out for me is, maybe this is where we started at the beginning, is you can see that Willa has a brain And that brain and that nervous system is ready to integrate what is useful to it, what is beneficial to it. It's attracted to that. And so the work is not one of pushing and cajoling and forcing, but is of a, you could say, a transfer of information. And her system is right there, ready to use what is useful to it. And I think that this is true for everybody. No matter their difficulty, they can get better. And that's because fundamentally, to say it in a ironic way, we have a brain which is more intelligent than we are, and looking out for our best interests.
Well, it's just a beautiful lesson, David. I know you give many beautiful functional integration lessons, and I really appreciate learning from you here within this series. I've now got to watch this lesson several times. I watched it a while back, and then in preparation for today, I watched it a few times, and it's been very helpful to me, frankly. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for the high compliment.
And David, we've been asking speakers to speak a little bit, to share a little bit with us a quote that really resonates for them right now, and maybe something that would provide some inspiration for others as well.
Well, I would really like to go back to the quote from Dr. Feldenkrais that I gave you at the very beginning, and that had attracted me and kept reverberating in my head for the couple of years before I met him. And that was that the only thing permanent about your behavior patterns is your belief that they are so. And I think that's a creed and insight about the general plasticity of our brain and our nervous system, that we're all capable of improvement. And I just love the optimism that's implied in it.
And if somebody wanted to make that quote a little more usable in their life, what would they do?
They would do awareness through movement. And they would find free awareness through movement lessons.
I think you've got a giveaway for us, don't you?
at feldenkraisaccess.com.
Well, actually, we've got a link for you below. So I'm just going to restate that. There's a link for them below the video. Just take a look down on your screen. There's a link that will take you straight to this free giveaway. And these are a series of free lessons.
I think there's about 20 free recorded awareness through movement lessons. Of course, there's more at the website. And there's programs, as you mentioned at the top of the hour, so to speak. There are programs that I created specifically for the public, and I think there's programs there that I created specifically for the public, and other things that are for practitioners.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in for another of our sessions here in the Move Better, Feel Better Feldenkrais Awareness Summit. It's been a great track, and just to remind you that you can participate in the panel discussion that'll be coming up with 2 other practitioners and myself. We'll talk about all 3 talks in this track, this theme of essential Feldenkrais. And of course, we also hope that you'll continue to tune into the rest of the summit and find the sessions that are potent for you, and watch the ones that you the ones that you most want to take in. And if for you, it's those daily awareness through movement lessons that we're providing, and the rest maybe is not quite as compelling, fabulous. And then for others, it's going to be these individual talks that are going to really appeal to them. So you take what really, really grabs your attention and is right for you right now, and you will move better. You will feel better. Thank you so much, David, for joining us.
If I may, Cynthia, I would like to thank you for your beautiful work and your contribution to people, in your contribution to health and the service that you're providing for us all.
Thank you, David. I'm glad for everybody who's made drops, major drops, small drops over the years. We just all keep building on what each other does. It's quite a community process, isn't it?
Amen.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And so David and I are going to say goodbye to all of you. Thank you for joining us.
Cheers.